Well, good morning. Welcome to Element Church Online. Happy Memorial Day. We are so thankful that you have taken the time to join us this morning. I just want to encourage you to take a minute this Memorial Day weekend and reflect. If you don't know, Memorial Day is a moment to be thankful for those who never came home from battle, those who fought for our freedom and ultimately gave their lives. And so I want to encourage you to take a minute and just reflect on that. Be thankful for those people, regardless of your politics, regardless of views on war and all that kind of stuff. We can be thankful for the men and women who have made sacrifices on our behalf so that we can have the freedom to sit here and contemplate the things that we contemplate. And so I want to encourage you to take a minute and do that. And while you do that, I'd also encourage you to take a minute and reflect on the people elsewhere in your life, maybe not in the military, but who have just made sacrifices so that you could experience a better life. And I'd encourage you to thank them. Take a minute, shoot them a text if you can, if they're still around, and just say thanks so much for the investment that you made in me. I want to tell you about one thing coming up at Element this week, and then we'll jump right into this week's message. So this coming Friday night, we're doing a virtual game night. It's going to be Friday evening. I think it's 7 o'clock. More details on this are going to come out later this week as we have them. So the best place for you to check us out is on Facebook and Instagram, so you can get all the details. We'll make sure we have them all out by Wednesday, so you know exactly where to tune in on Zoom and how to be a part of it. We want you to get connected with this group on Friday evening. It's going to be fun. It's going to be enjoyable. We're probably going to play some goofy games and just laugh together, but it's going to be a chance to hang out with one another. And I don't know about you, but I've definitely missed that. So I'd encourage you to check us out on Facebook and Instagram so you can have all the details so you can join us Friday night for our virtual game night. All right, so let's get into this week's conversation. If you're just joining us, this is Roundtable Week 3. So the past 2 weeks we've been getting together. We've had a discussion with 5 guys. Here's what happened. I asked 4 different men and myself to read John chapter 5, verses 16 to 47. It's 32 verses. I asked a group of guys to read it once a day for a week, study it, and write down their notes. And then we were just going to get together and talk. What happened is we got together and talked. I thought it was going to be like 2 or 3 weeks worth of messages. We didn't even get through half of it, and we're already 3 weeks in. And so this week's conversation actually comes from the very first verse. John chapter 5, verse 16 talks about Jesus healing on the Sabbath and the Pharisees being frustrated about that. And if you're unfamiliar with this premise, the Sabbath was the day God had set apart for rest. He had created the world in 6 days, and then he rested on the 7th. And when he establishes order for his people, he tells them, listen, you need to remember the Sabbath and keep it holy. It's just as important as like not murdering, not stealing, not lying, worshiping God, all of those things. He says this is a really, really important thing, and I want you to pay attention to it. And so I don't know about you, but for me in 2020, I struggle to rest. And it's not that I struggle to take time off. It's that when I take time off, if anything goes wrong, I start to feel guilty. I think I should have done something different. I begin to beat myself up for just taking a break. And so if you've ever dealt with that, if you've ever felt like, I'm not sure I know how to rest or how to rest well, this message is for you. Now, 2 things I want you to know. First of all, this conversation took 1 hour and 5 minutes. And so we've had to edit some of that stuff out. We've cut it down a little bit. It's about a 40-minute conversation for you to tune into. You're going to want to take notes. But if you decide, hey, I really enjoyed this, I'd love the full conversation. You can find that on our YouTube page. It's going to be posted tomorrow morning. And so make sure that you subscribe so that you can get that update and you be checked out on that. The second thing I want to encourage you to do is just get ready. Take some notes. Grab a piece of paper, a pen. Be ready to write some things down because listen, here's the deal. This conversation on rest and on the Sabbath, on what it means to keep it holy, will help you take a break. In the midst of coronavirus, in the midst of parenting, in the midst of work-life balance, in the midst of everything going on, this conversation is meant to help you and bless you and encourage you. So check it out. First up, we have Jason. I bring the pain. Age 36. Height and weight unknown because, honestly, who really cares? This Michigan native embraces the cold weather and the outdoors. In addition to doing his thing at work, Jason serves at Element as a trustee overseeing our finances and our personnel. Next up, we have Francis, the tall guy, Becknell, age 26. This former Terp tears it up on the volleyball court before leading worship on our stage each week. He enjoys spending time with his wife, their pup, and watching old reruns of The Office before getting his hands dirty working on cars and trucks. Third, we've got Steve, my beard is gray, Eastwood. Age unknown. This weightlifter and personal trainer works to help others be at their best. He's committed to his wife, his family, and the group of men he calls friends, doing whatever it takes to help them move life forward. Last up is Dave, the new guy, Black. An avid listener to the Element podcast, Dave may be new to our stage, but definitely is not new to our community. Not only is he a husband and dad of 2, he helped start and pastor a Messianic Jewish congregation north of Baltimore City. Dave may be the new guy at the table, but he brings a wealth of knowledge worth leaning into. We started a conversation a little bit ago, and Dave, you had a comment that, like, you come from a Jewish background, or Messianic Jewish background, so you just made the comment, like, Jewish people aren't asking what is the Sabbath.
Right.
Like, it's a Gentile question.
That's right? A Gentile question, right.
So what do you mean by that?
Well, Jewish people, it's like any cultural thing that you are raised with. You don't question it so much because that's just what you do as a people. Gentiles, for the most part, the Sabbath, to go back a little bit, the Jewish people were given the Sabbath. They were given the commandments. They were instructed on what to do and what not to do for the Sabbath. And then along with that, over the years, they added a whole bunch of other rules for themselves to do and not do during the Sabbath. Gentiles were never really given that historically. I know a lot of churches, have put rules on Sunday and
Sure.
different things, but and I grew up with that, when I was little. The state of Maryland used to have blue laws where you couldn't do any shopping or things on, and that changed eventually. Yeah. But so this idea of the Sabbath is something that Jews understand.
Yeah.
They know what it is, even if they are not religious. They understand the Sabbath. And I tend to think that it's more Gentiles because it's not something we were really given. So we're trying to understand it, and we're trying to understand it through a perspective that is not culturally Jewish.
Sure.
Yeah.
So what's the principle of the Sabbath?
Yeah, I was kind of wondering what the rules were.
Yeah.
Just generally the rules surrounding the Sabbath are. But as far as I know, it's just you can't do anything that is considered work. Is that a good...
Yeah, basically, as far as what the Old Testament tells us, just the literal, what the Old Testament tells us is do not do any laborious labor and do not strike a fire. So there are a couple things that, you really weren't supposed to do, but through the years, like many people do, you have this little let's call it like this beautiful rose bush, and in order to preserve the rose bush, you build a hedge around the rose bush, and eventually you're building hedges to the point where you don't even see or remember what it was that was in the center of the hedges. And I think that has happened, and it's something that the Jews have done, but it's also something that we all do.
Sure.
Know?
Yeah, we love rules.
Yeah, we love rules.
I mean, I love to break rules. But we love structure though.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, we all like structure. I was telling Steve today I get impatient, and he was like, "No, really." But it's when people don't follow rules of driving. I've talked about this a lot from stage,
yeah.
but we pulled into your street and there's some dude parked nearly in the middle of the road. I'm like, why would you just pull your car over there?
Wasn't a green Subaru Forester, was
it may have been. Jason, you idiot. No, but it's a dude. And he's just standing outside his car talking on his cell phone, and I'm like, what? You pull off the road. But part of that is I want a rule that says you need to park in a parking space or in a driveway or closer to the there's reasons for those things.
Yeah.
And as much as structure, I think I want to be above it personally. I want other people to follow. I like the idea of structure.
I saw a meme recently that said, and probably most people have seen it. It says, now that we've learned to wash our hands, next thing is learn to use turn signals. We all love rules.
So I'm just kind of curious too, because as a Gentile, I've always just taken the Sabbath to mean a day of rest, and I know that one of the commandments is keep holy the Sabbath. So what is the correlation between those two in the Jewish custom? Because if it's not doing laborious labor, what are they allowed to do?
Well, they're not supposed to, and you can look through, if you do like a survey of the Old Testament, you can look and see things that they weren't supposed to do, and things such as when they were wandering in the wilderness and God was feeding them with manna.
Yeah.
First the Sabbath started, the Jewish day starts from sundown to sundown.
Got it.
Not morning to morning like we think of a day, but it's sundown to sundown. So Friday at sundown is the beginning of the Sabbath, and then the Sabbath ends on Saturday at sundown. So in the scriptures, when they were wandering through the wilderness and God was feeding them with manna, one of the things that they were told to do is gather enough manna to last them for the Sabbath, so that they wouldn't gather manna on the Sabbath. Now, the interesting thing with that is what they were told in gathering manna is only get what you can eat for that day.
Mm-hmm.
Because the next day, and we even see an example in the scriptures, where they gathered too much and the next day it had all gone bad. It was all rancid. But the miracle, one of the miracles of the manna, is that it would always last through the Sabbath.
Mm-hmm.
But the rest of the day of the week, 6 days a week, it would only last for the one day.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, a principle I've always heard, like, part of the principle of the Sabbath and resting is not that, like, we don't feel like there's more stuff to do, but that for them, like in that example with the manna, is like you're resting, which is a matter of trusting God.
Yes.
To come through for where you wouldn't be able to sustain.
Right.
And it's a principle that God said. I mean, you brought up it's in the Ten Commandments, though.
Yeah.
So it's obviously a thing that's significant. I mean, I don't know about you guys. I grew up in a church where I don't know that it was like church mandated, but I know that at times, like, I remember people like judging people for like mowing their lawns on Sundays.
Really?
Yeah, like it's like that's work. You know, like we had this kind of hedgerow built around what a Sunday day of rest was.
Well, the term Sabbath breakers, right, comes to mind. I feel like that was a term that was used in, older Christian cultures not that long ago, right?
To like a demeaning term, Sabbath
yeah,
breaker.
Sabbath breaker. Like, oh, you're doing work on the Sabbath. You're not supposed to be. It was in some like historical fiction novel that I read, I think, in elementary school.
Gotcha.
The Sabbath breakers. Those were bad people, right? Like in colonial America or something. So.
Yeah. So why would it have been a problem to heal on the Sabbath? Right. So Jesus is healing on the Sabbath, and this isn't like a claim that we're reading. This is the story you get in the beginning of John 5, where Jesus has just done it. And I don't think, one of the things, my opinion of Jesus, I don't think Jesus did a lot of things haphazardly or unintentionally. So I don't think he's accidentally done this on a Saturday.
Oh, I didn't know what day it was.
I didn't realize I was supposed to be in the temple.
Oh,
I just don't see that, right? I mean, maybe it was.
As soon as he healed the guy, he goes, "Oops,
Yeah.
my bad."
And he hit him, knocked the guy back down. He's like, "Get up tomorrow."
Land again.
Yeah.
He's not apologetic about it, is he?
No.
He does it because he thinks it's right or something. Or,
Yeah, I think there's intentionality behind it. The question is, I guess what would have been the issue with doing it on the Sabbath, and then why does Jesus care? What statement is he making? What significance is there?
That's a good question.
I think, to answer the second part of that, I think he deliberately did it to be controversial,
Okay.
because he knew it would spark, this debate about, well, how can you do that? Oh, just because I'm the Son of God. I think he kind of had a plan.
I can do what I want.
Yeah.
I think he was kind of saying that that people were more important than some of the rules that had been instilled. And I know that the Sabbath was something that was given by God, so it's interesting that Jesus is almost breaking a godly commandment in a way.
Yeah.
But I think he's allowed to do that because of who he claims to be in one way.
Okay.
Yeah, but that doesn't seem fair from a human point of view, where God can make the rules and then break them.
And then break them.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's true.
But that is kind of exactly what he does, right? I mean, you have the example of the manna, where God is almost reinforcing, the holiness of the Sabbath. And yeah, sure, there's a faith lesson that he's trying to teach in there as well. But then you have Jesus come and deliberately break the Sabbath. Or I think in some other passage he talks about, if your donkey falls into a hole or something, who will not raise him out of there. So he's sort of, on the one hand, there's this desire to keep things holy and to follow God's law almost to the letter. But then on the other hand, there's this teaching principle of, look for the underlying meaning, of rest or doing good, healing, right?
Yeah. So my only pushback on this is that I don't know that Jesus breaks God's law in healing on the Sabbath. He breaks man's law, right? Like, so to use your analogy of like that hedgerow that's been built around it, and the hedgerow that was built around that, and the hedgerow that's built around that. Like, Pharisees have set up this. Like God laid out 10 commandments. The Pharisees had 613 laws or something.
Well, God actually did that.
Well, good.
Yeah.
I'm glad you're here. I'm so thankful. The Pharisees add a bunch of laws
Yes, they did.
on top of stuff, a lot of restrictions.
A lot of interpretation, right?
Yeah.
Or something.
And so you have, I guess I have the question, like, I don't know that Jesus is disobedient to what God said.
Yeah.
As much as it is pointing people back in the direction of, like, let's break down some of these hedgerows and get back to what God intended. I know you did a lot of research on the Sabbath. What's your thoughts?
Well, I think that the first thing that I think is that in that time period, the Pharisees were very literal to the point of legalistic, with God's rules and their own rules. I personally don't. When I see the 10 Commandments, I know that I can't keep any of those commandments, and I don't think that that was God's purpose when He gave the 10 Commandments to the Israelites when they were in the wilderness. I think it was I think if you break them down into the sections about God and the sections about people, it fits in with Jesus saying, the greatest commandment is to love God with all your heart, all your mind, all your soul, all your strength, and then love your neighbor as yourself. Those culminate what the 10 Commandments say.
Yeah.
So it's not a literal interpretation of that, and it's also not something that we can even keep as sinful, fallen human beings. So the thing that I found interesting was, and I'll start with this, is that Jesus performing miracles in itself was His way of saying, I'm going to show you that I can conquer sickness and deformity and possession and death, because ultimately my goal here is to conquer sin. So whether He did it on the Sabbath or one of the other 6 days of the week, I don't know that really mattered. But I think really the understanding of what the Sabbath was, and I think this is what Jesus was getting at, is that when they think back to, in Genesis, the Jews would read where God created the earth in 6 days, and on the seventh day He rested. He rested so that He could enjoy the perfection that He had just created. And that's the standard by which we should live, but we can't do that right now because we live in a broken, imperfect world. So I really think that Jesus healing on the Sabbath was His way of saying, I'm taking back what's broken, and I want you guys to see like the importance of what the Sabbath really means. It's not, pain and suffering in the world does not take a break on the Sabbath.
Yeah.
So Jesus is saying to them, people are more important than this rule. And the rule really means that once we get into the kingdom, and once all of the pain and suffering has gone away, that day is set aside to enjoy all the things that God has done for all of us. And I think that, because you kind of said it when we were talking earlier, I liked what you said about how Grayson views the Sabbath, that it's just a day to look back over the week and enjoy and revel in the things that God has done for you and for your friends and for your family within that week, and it's okay.
Yeah.
And it's okay to enjoy those things. So I don't know that the Sabbath really is something that we can honestly and truly keep while we're here in this imperfect world. I'm open to discussion about that,
Yeah.
whatever, but that's just kind of what I
One of the
took away
things,
from that.
one of the things that I've always found interesting is if you look in Leviticus 17, God is laying out the holidays that the Jewish people are supposed to keep, which, you know, Yom Kippur and the Passover, and there's actually 7 holidays that are listed, and then the 8th holiday is the weekly Sabbath. So he gives them 7 holidays that happen once a year, and then this 8th holiday that happens once a week. And I always thought that was kind of neat.
Yeah.
I like how that kind of meshes in the way with what
Yeah.
you're saying, Steve, because to me it says, think of the Sabbath as being there for people, right, as a source of rest and enjoyment, right? It's a holiday, versus the flip of that, of people are there to make sure that they honor the Sabbath and keep it holy, right? It's a different purpose.
I mean, it goes along with what Jesus said there. God made the Sabbath for man, not man for the Sabbath.
Exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
One thing I was thinking about was, I think that all of us have been involved in church leadership in some way, and that cycle can be draining and just really difficult. It comes around every week, except when there's a massive pandemic going on. I guess it's a little different, but so that cycle just wears you down. And then there's the from Sabbath sabbatical comes around, and people have to take sabbaticals from even the things that were intended to be good, like running a church or making church happen. People have to rest from that. And it's God didn't say rest from everything except for the things that serve me. He's like, rest from everything, and in so doing, you're turning your attention towards me and worshiping me in that way. Something I've been thinking about just because before coronavirus, church is tired. it's a hard thing.
Even Israel was given what we call the year of Jubilee, which was once every 7 years. It was a Sabbath year, where the whole year they couldn't do any work.
That's interesting.
Wow. And there was a lot of other things too. Like anybody who was a slave would be set free. There was just a whole lot of things that happened on that Sabbath year.
So you bring up the Sabbath year, like one of the most important parts about that was allowing the ground to replenish the nutrients that they had farmed out for 6 years to do that. So, it just made things grow better.
Yeah.
There was practicality.
There was practicality behind that.
Are you saying everything wasn't hormone induced?
I didn't say that. You said that. Stop trying to lead me down a road.
GMO.
You're saying it was organic? No.
I'm not saying anything that you're asking me.
Yeah.
Nice try, though.
All right, so let me ask this: where do you guys struggle to keep the Sabbath, or where do you struggle to rest? Rest is a great principle. It's not the easiest to execute on. I don't know about you, but I'm pretty disciplined about setting aside time for rest. The problem is my brain doesn't stop on that day. You said pain doesn't stop on that day. My phone doesn't not ring on that day. For me, there's this kind of consistent struggle just in the day-to-day of living in a world that is struggling, of where do I rest? How do I get my rest? How do I not feel guilty for that rest? And so, there's some things that do you guys struggle to rest, or would you say, no, I'm good with it? Rest is not an issue for me.
For me, it's struggling to not carry other people's burdens. So,
Sure.
And just kind of allowing God to do what He should be doing and what He is said He will do, which is to take care of people, and that I don't have to be the person that is I don't know, worried about someone's situation or worried about what I can be doing to help them through something or whatever. So
Sure.
yeah, taking all that off my shoulders. Struggle.
I think that it is a struggle or difficult today. I don't know if it's more difficult in modern times than it has been in the past or not, but it's definitely difficult in this day and age to take a Sabbath because how busy we are, but also how intermingled we are with, I guess, other faiths that don't take the Sabbath, right? So for me, it's never been difficult for me to find time to rest, and I can rest in a number of different ways. Like I can rest by exercising, I can rest by, going out and doing something fun. That all rejuvenates me,
Sure.
mostly just because it's not my desk job.
Sure.
But I guess part of me has always felt that there needs to be some sort of, religious component to that rest, and that's what I struggle to get. Right? Because even if I'm exercising, I'm not necessarily, focused on God. If I'm going out to a beer tasting event, I'm not necessarily focused on God. Might be, but
How could you be?
It depends on how many years you
Yes.
drink.
Right. But even if I'm at Element serving, I'm not necessarily focused on God, right?
Sure.
Because
100%.
right. So anyway, finding that balance between something that rejuvenates me mentally and physically, but also spiritually is
Yeah.
tough. So.
Makes sense. You struggle with the Sabbath? Or with the idea of rest?
I don't think that I do. I don't think that I do much anymore. It's been a long road to get where I am, but there just comes a point. So I'll give you this example. So, in this whole, isolation thing and having some time off from work, we're doing some things around the house. Christina wants me to take the wallpaper off the wall so she can paint. So what that meant was on, what's today, Tuesday? So on Sunday, after we watched Hot Wings with Phil, Gabe and I went into
Thanks for the plug.
Hey, man,
Whether you watched it or not, I'm good with that.
So Gabe and I went into our playroom, and taking the wallpaper off the wall essentially meant gut the room.
Yeah.
So
Take down all the drywall. And
take
stuff?
down all, well, it's plaster,
Oh,
so that was
plaster.
even better.
Oh wow.
So we're in there, dust is flying, it's dirty, but I'm spending time with my son, and it's dirty and it's a tough job, but we're having fun. Well, I was having fun. He may not have been having fun. I was letting him bang holes in the wall, so I think he was having fun.
Comment on this video. If you were having fun.
Comment below.
Yeah.
But it got to the point in that day where there was only a little bit of stuff left to do, and I just physically couldn't do it. And I wanted to finish it, and I was like, you know what, Gabe, let's just stop, and I'll pick it up tomorrow. And then I went in the next day, and in a couple hours I was finished. But I sat down, I had a couple of beers. Well, I took a shower,
Yeah.
had a couple of beers, and went to bed. And then the next day I got up and I was fresh. And then I worked out, and it was a brutal workout yesterday after finishing up that work, and I wanted to work out today, and I couldn't. So it's easy for me to say I'm in tune with myself to know that
You need rest.
physically I need rest at
Sure.
certain points. But I'm with Jason too on the mental and emotional aspects of it, where I need to do the fun things to take my mind off of all that other crap.
Yeah.
And just allow myself to enjoy the things that I enjoy, because God gave those desires to me because He wants me to enjoy them. I love weightlifting. How many people say that? I mean, it's not.
I'm not good at it.
I mean,
Francis
I like
doesn't
it. I'm
Francis
learning.
doesn't say that after yesterday.
I'm learning from him.
Francis and Steve worked out yesterday.
Learning to love.
He's sitting over your sore.
But that's the thing, like doing that, like having that ability and that desire to do those things, that brings me enjoyment, because I feel like those are the things that God has given me to do. Sitting here and talking with you guys is, even though it's been, a couple of days of doing a lot of research and stuff like that, it was very refreshing
Sure.
mentally
I agree with
and
that,
intellectually,
Mhm.
especially to spend a lot of time diving deep into God's Word,
Yes.
which is something that I don't do on a regular basis, and things that I've talked about before where, you can sleep enough and you can eat well and you can exercise and you can be emotionally and physically healthy, but if your spiritual life is not at rest, that eventually will fade and the restlessness takes over. And it doesn't matter how well you eat or how much you work out or how much sleep you have, there's always this restlessness in your spirit. So this in particular has allowed me to rest my spirit. And it's been great. It's been great.
Yeah, it's been fun this week to do something different. To not, like, even for me, to not read a passage like I'm preaching it. Like, this is a much bigger passage than I would be able to preach in one message, but like, just to kind of read it in a way to have a conversation about it. And to, I think, well, at least as far as I can understand, like, when we talk about like meditating and things like that, it's less about crossing my legs and sitting uncomfortably and humming a little bit, and more about I've kind of gotten the idea of like how cows chew grass, where they just continue to like mull it over and mull it over and mull it over. Like with my dad used to say, chew the cud. But like I remember pastors like saying, like, I remember being in a church one time in a southern church where somebody like literally told the pastor, chew the cud, meaning I want you to kind of stay there, like don't run on to something else. Just kind of like just chew on that for a little bit, because there's a lot more there, or I gotta hear that another time to be able to dwell on it. And so for me, like, just to sit down and discipline, just the discipline that I gave you guys, that I've held myself to, of like, I'm gonna read this passage once a day for 7 days, and I'm gonna read the same 30 verses, and I'm not gonna read anything else. I'm not gonna study anything. Like, this is just kind of where I'm sitting has been refreshing in some ways for me. So I don't think I'm lazy, but at the risk of being called lazy, I'm pursuant of rest and helping others be able to rest. It's the reason I give away cigars or have a boat where people can kind of come hang out, because I just want to help people.
So
rest.
your motto should be rest with the resters.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, but it's the people who won't. It's the people who won't rest, right?
I'm in.
Yeah. No, but I mean, the reason my boat is named the Real Rest is because Jesus tells us that He would give us a real rest. If we've learned to pattern our lives after Him, He wants to show us how to have a real rest. But I think the reality is most of us have no idea what that looks like. Yeah. But I think I mean, I've talked with a lot of people. That conversation with Grayson came up because, if you guys don't know Grayson, he was our worship leader like when we kicked off Element like 5 years ago. But Grayson, such a deep thinker, but man, he's a guy who's done so many different things in his life. He's accomplished a lot. He's helped a lot of people. He's made a big difference in the world. But he said, I feel guilty when I sit down and spend money on myself. I feel guilty when I take a day off knowing that there's still need out there. And his conclusion was to study the Sabbath. And he went, the best I can understand it is to allow the Sabbath to be a day where I celebrate what God's accomplished in and through me. And if I can just hold on to that, there is value. Like, I think that's what God would want, was for me to step back and like reflect a little bit on what He's done and what He's been able to accomplish.
You know, something that was said here a few minutes ago at the table was how Jesus referred to Himself as the Lord of the Sabbath.
Yeah.
And you think of that, Him being the Lord of the Sabbath, He also goes on to say, come to me, you who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Come to the Lord of the Sabbath and partake of Sabbath rest.
Yeah.
That's basically what He was saying.
Yeah. That's great.
The whole idea of rest is so countercultural to what America is all about. I mean, America is about showing up to your job and getting your stuff done. It might be changing a little bit right now, but from the beginning from when the country was founded, I feel like that's what Americans were born to do, was to show up to work in that way. And Jesus is being countercultural here when He throws their rules out the window and decides that it's more important that this man who's struggled for however many years receives his rest and receives healing. And
sure.
It's just like what He does. He always turns the world on its head and kind of flips people upside down. So
it's great. So I think, to add on what you're saying, I think especially people in their 20s and 30s, like, we're in a building time in life. Like, if you just think about where you are in your 20s and 30s, like, you're building career. Like we're not over here where they've established career. It's near retirement. Like we're not in that phase.
That's an
4
old,
years, baby.
That's an
4
old,
years.
That's an old joke without making an old joke comment.
I did not say it.
Yes,
you
you
said
did.
it.
You inferred it.
4 years for me, 5 for Steve.
I wish, hey, you know what? My goal is to retire by 50. So
But-
that's 4.5. That's 3.5 years
Beards
from
get
now.
grayer.
Yeah, the beards do get grayer. Yeah. But so
I should be sitting there.
But so the thought behind it though is, shut up, man! Now you messed me up. So the thought I'm trying to lean into there is this idea that I think for guys in their 20s and 30s, we're still trying to build. You're trying to build something. I think when you start to hit that mid 40s, you start to reflect a little bit more, and then you get into your 50s, you start thinking about legacy and what you're leaving behind. Like, but especially for our generation and kind of like that age group, it's like. Not only is our culture say drive, do. What have you done for me lately? What have you done for me lately? But then just where we're at in life is all about I'm trying to build something. I'm trying to achieve something. I'm trying to accomplish something. Like, and so I think that leaves us at a place where we feel a question of is it okay to take a day off? What does it look like to do that? You know, like how do we process?
Well, I
that?
would say that that's tough too because a lot of times people will say, "I'm going to take a day off," and then someone else will say, "Well, I'll do it," and then you lose that. Then you lose that opportunity because somebody else is willing to step in and do it.
And they're
So
just going to
there's-
fill, yeah.
Right. So there's a threat of like, instability
Sure.
in that regard.
We also have voices from like I keep thinking of like the sports world, where the no days off mentality,
Right.
Sure.
stuff like that.
Yeah.
But-
Yeah, but I had people multiple times. I was hanging out with somebody. I don't want to throw them under the bus. I was hanging out with somebody a couple months ago, and they asked how my day was going. I was like, man, it's good. Like, it's a light week, and today's my day off. And they're like, what is that like? And I was just like, it's freeing. And they're like, I need to hang out with you more because I don't get time off. And it was like they were mad at me for having time to hang out.
Right.
And they're like, I don't have time to hang out. And I'm like, well, I do. So, like, I can, but what I wanted to lean into was like, man, you need to schedule that. Like, if I could help, I mean, this is just my heart as a pastor. Like, if I could help our church get anything, it would be schedule a day off. Like learn to trust God enough to say, I'm going to take time and rest because you're running a marathon, not a sprint. And so if it doesn't happen today, it will happen tomorrow, and that will be okay.
And I think also that more than just taking a break is a good thing.
Sure.
But we need, for those of us who trust in Jesus, we need to plug into Him.
Absolutely.
That becomes
So it's intentional.
a major thing. Yeah, we need not just physical refreshment, we also need spiritual refreshment. We need a refocusing and a recentering before. And if I can tell you very quickly, one of the things that I think where Jewish people have it right, they have a whole lot wrong. They have we could have a discussion about that. But what I think they have right today is they start the Sabbath with a celebration. There's a Sabbath meal. There is the lighting of candles. There is the saying of prayers. And there's the blessing of children and the blessing of the spouses. That happens every beginning of every Sabbath. At the end of the Sabbath, they do something very similar where they purposefully close the Sabbath.
Yeah.
So those services that are done within the home, you don't have to go any place and do that. You do that but those bookend services
That's great.
become like those bookends that say, this section between here is holy.
It's set aside.
And set apart.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's a good thing. I think that's a very good thing. And it's something that we could do as believers in Jesus. We could say, okay, but it takes effort, like you said. But we could say, okay, this will be the time where I'm going to start this time focused on the Lord. I'm going to end the time focused on the Lord, and do that purposefully. And then I believe that within time, the center part becomes focused on the Lord too.
Yeah. One thing I think about with that is it had to be awkward when God set it up.
Yeah.
Like if we put that
Oh, yeah.
principle into practice today, it's gonna feel weird.
Right.
On week 1, it's not gonna feel like, oh, I didn't pray throughout the day. I didn't have this real spiritual moment in the midst of all. Like I think there's gonna be a lot of weeks that it would take to kind of pattern that before we really begin to feel the
Jewish people came out of slavery.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, what kind of break did they get? You know,
They had no
you're
break.
slaves.
24/7, 365.
Right.
And then God goes, take a day off.
And
Like
they're like, well, what do I do?
yeah. So I think. I mean, maybe some of us are considering. I know there's people at Element that like, as they listen to something like that, are like, well, what would I even do on a day off? That's something to explore.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a freedom that we have. That's. I think we can find joy in the exploration of what rest looks like for us when we give ourselves the permission to do it.
Well, I think the key word in what you just said is freedom, because we talk a lot. If you talk to people outside of the church, they'll be like, "Oh, church, a lot of rules and regulations, and this, that, and the other thing." But if you sit back and you think about it, and you really think about like what God was really trying to do, there is a lot of freedom in being able to enjoy the things that you enjoy.
Yeah.
In that time as well, like it's not a. I mean, there are things that you should and shouldn't do, but you have the ability to make that decision on your own.
Sure.
Right, wrong, or indifferent. I don't know. Maybe that's a little off the mark.
I was thinking about how right now a lot of us have, I mean, just currently with what we're dealing with in the world, we have this time of like, where most of us, some of us might be teleworking, some of us might. I mean, I know you guys are Fort related, right? So you're 1 week on, 1 week off, I guess.
They're unofficially Fort related.
Okay, so 1 week on,
Now
1
it's
week
on
off,
video.
or something. You're
Thanks,
doing an
Francis.
AB week or something like that. So, but you guys have this. I mean, a lot of us are experiencing this time of what do we do with our time, and how can we rest well? Maybe the whole world is slowing down for a reason, and we're trying to figure out how we can rest well right now. Unfortunately, the people that are working in hospitals and all those frontline workers aren't getting that. But for us right now, we get a chance to try and
Explore
figure
what rest
some of
looks
those
like.
things
a
out.
little
Yeah,
bit,
explore rest. So
yeah.
spend a half hour on rest.
Yeah,
That's good.
which isn't a bad thing. How do we? So one of the things I said this to Steve today, and I don't know that I've ever like said this from stage or that people even know it. So, one of the reasons at Element we do communion every week is because communion is the gospel message. As a pastor, it forces me to be sharing the gospel in every message. I believe all of Scripture, from Genesis to Revelation, points us in the direction of Christ and can thematically point us in the direction of the gospel. The idea that like Jesus dies for our sins, redemption is possible, he's resurrected from the grave, like all that stuff that we celebrate in communion. The reason I do communion every week as a pastor is because it forces me to make sure I don't get stuck in the middle of John and stop teaching gospel. That I just, that I don't just kind of go tangentially down some road that doesn't help anybody or doesn't point people in the direction of Christ, but just kind of explores an idea. But the reason we do communion is because it forces me to make sure that gospel is in there. So I think there's things in the principle of rest, the principle of the Sabbath, what the Pharisees were confused about, what Jesus is ultimately trying to teach them, that build into principles of the gospel. You guys think of any, or anything come to mind that you'd say, what I understand about the Sabbath influences, or if I look at it through that lens, it can influence how I see redemptive gospel?
Well, the first thing I thought of when you were talking about communion, I thought of a conversation that my wife and I had just a couple weeks ago. We now attend a church that does communion every week. My wife, being Jewish, she made a comment. She says, I don't have a problem with doing communion every week. But I don't think that that's what Jesus intended when he said, do this in remembrance of me as often as you do it, because that was a Passover meal, and I think he was referring strictly to the Passover. And I said to her, well, yes, I agree. But every single Sabbath among Jews is started with the breaking of bread and the drinking of wine. I said, so Jews have communion every single week.
Whether you call it that or
they
not.
just don't know it. It's, and this is interesting. If I can share this, the Hebrew for the breaking of the bread, the Hebrew prayer is Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam hamotzei lechem min haaretz. It's blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who brings forth bread from the earth. I pointed to this to my wife and I said, think about this. Bread does not come from the earth. Grain comes from the earth. And then we make bread. Except for one case where Jesus called himself the bread of life and he came forth from the earth.
Yeah.
That's the case. So that is a standard prayer every Jew says, every Shabbat. And I think it speaks specifically of Jesus and his resurrection and his, of course, his death.
Sure. Well, Element, as we close this morning, I want to encourage you to take a minute and take communion with us. You can go grab a cracker or some juice, just hit the pause button. But really what happens here is that we take a cracker and some juice representing the body and blood of Christ, and we take a few moments to reflect on the sacrifice that he made, the fact that he stepped into our mess to redeem us out of it. What we see all throughout Scripture, Old Testament, New Testament, beginning to end, is that God does the work of redeeming his people, and communion is the celebration of that. Communion is the celebration of God doing what it took to redeem us back to himself. And so I would just encourage you to take a minute and reflect on the sacrifice that Jesus made, and then reflect on the fact that he stepped into our mess to redeem us out of it. Be thankful for that, and just take a moment, maybe say a prayer and do that. But I want to pray for us as we get ready to take communion, and then we'll look forward to seeing you Friday night for game night. Make sure that you check us out on Facebook and Instagram for more details. Let's pray. God, I thank you so much for who you are. God, thanks for the group of guys that are part of this conversation, that get to be a part of my life. Men who just speak truth and grace, who make me better as a man, as a pastor, as a dad, in so many ways. But God, thank you more than anything for the sacrifice that you made for us. Memorial Day is a day to reflect on the troops. We can do that tomorrow. But God, today is a day to reflect on the sacrifice you made, the love that you displayed, the freedom that you give us. And so, God, we want to be your people. We ask that you guide us, but we want to just be thankful for the fact that you designated rest as something necessary for us. So God, help us to be men and women who will choose to rest as a matter of obedience to you. And then God, we just pray that, like you have throughout the rest of history, that you would step up and that you would move in a way that makes up for anything that we might miss in the midst of our downtime. God, help us to trust you enough to take a break. God, thank you for who you are. Thank you for loving us. Thank you for filling in the gaps when we can't. It's in your name I pray. Amen. Guys, go ahead and eat that cracker and drink the juice. Have a great Sunday, and we'll see you next week.